couple of months ago, a group of the regional preachers and I got together at my house, and we spent a weekend watching a conference, a seminar, of which the primary theme was be human. And the focus was that God became human. And, sometimes in churches we can get so intellectual, we can get so this is black and white, and this is what it's meant to be and what we're meant to be, and the way things ought to be, that we lose contact with humanity. Now, we still experience it, but oftentimes we still deny it while we're experiencing it. And we as people have a lot to us. And what's amazing in part about the God we serve is that He had the patience. He had the wherewithal. He had the love that I think, as we read Scripture, shows prohibited Him from remaining in heaven and simply barking orders and saying, this is how it's done. Now, let me be clear. When I talk about God's directives, I kind of referred to some imagery of God there. But even when God gives His directives, and His human nature shows this, as He became human, they aren't that intolerant king that we're studying about in Nebuchadnezzar. The self-serving rulers that we see globe-wide today. God's saying, I made you. I know you. Here's what you want to do. This is best. This is how it should be. God became human, and the Bible is written by humans and for humans. And within it is such richness that has real and concrete impacts on our lives. The Human Church is actually a title of this mini-series. 3, possibly 4 lessons that we're going to look at about the church. And today we're going to ask the question, what does it have to do with a home? What does the church have to do with the home? Next couple weeks and next week, and David, I didn't even catch on to that until you said it's complicated. But next week, we're going to dive a little bit deeper, although we're going to touch upon it today about the human. We're complicated. Tom, are you complicated? I meant to tell Scott I'm complicated, right? It's complicated. And then thirdly, we're going to deal with it matters how we love. Those are some of the lessons that in the weeks to come we're going to delve into, before going on to another series that will build off of this. What does it have to do with a home? I was talking to a handful of individuals here a couple months ago, and we were talking about slogans. And if you notice in any of our advertisements and in our brochure for the church, the slogan that is on front, and it appears anywhere I can fit it with our logo, not just so other people might think about this and start to know this about us, but for a reminder for us, a reminder for me of what I need to be and what I should be and where I'm trying to go. Our slogan says, where love for God and love for mankind are the highest priorities. Isn't that what we're shooting for? Another slogan I throw in a lot of my lessons and some of our advertisements is be great, be God's. That's something we're shooting for. To not be great because I'm great, that's a hopeless, that ship sailed. But to be great because I belong to God. But as we were talking about these slogans and the impact they have on people, Mom actually pointed out to me when Larry Van Steenberg came here, he started using the slogan, where your heart can find a home. Raise your hand if you remember that, where your heart can find a home. When she said that, I thought, oh, Ella remembers that too. Good. I'm glad you have that good of a memory. I forgot it till she said it, but what a beautiful slogan as well that was and can be used. As we look at the human church, I want to acknowledge that this might be dangerous, that we're not what we should be. We're not perfect. When's the last time, is anyone in here ever seen a fault with the church? Raise your hand if you would. Right. Quite a few hands are up, if not most of them. We'll get the rest of you paying attention shortly. You want to know what the beauty of that is? You fit in here. That's the beauty of a flawed church. Ernie, if we were a perfect church, you wouldn't have a place in it. Yeah, the human church, right? Yeah. He points it out that the church is perfect. And we're going to touch upon that as we go throughout this series. And the people aren't. So the part that includes Ernie and I is not perfect. That part. The part that Jesus did, it's perfect. It's just part that I touch. And the beauty of it is that I wouldn't fit in and you wouldn't fit in if it were perfect. But what's Mike saying? Is that just... I did that, Kevin. Is that just making excuses for our shortcomings? I want to examine this idea of what we are meant to be. Think about home. When I grew up, that white car didn't sit there. There's a little gray car that wasn't sitting there either. I stopped over in Troy. You see this? Big section of high grass right between the property lines. Is that your dad? It was real wet there all spring, I noticed, and it had been really high, you know. But when we think of a home, when you think of your home, do some beautiful images and ideas come back to mind? You girls traveled a long ways to come back home, right? Yeah. Have all kinds of memories around our homes. And I took this picture because I wanted the yard over here. There was a lot of places over here that didn't grow grass when I was young, because Isaiah and I and Adam, I'm not sure if Leslie's with us, I can't see comments at this point, but Adam and a whole group, and Billy and Benji, and we would play baseball most summer on the side that film. We spent hours and hours and hours there. And then as it started to get a little cooler and football season started, the backyard here was, well, it's a rectangle. So it was just suited perfect for football. Same, so that a lot of the town would gather in that, and we would play ball there. And then when Chris and I would get snowed in, Chris was a good bit younger than us, and this would drive Dad crazy. He would tell us not to do it, but he never really enforced it. He just complained about it, and we found that we could put up with his complaining as long as he really didn't stop us from playing football in the hallway. And we designed this whole game around football in the hallway, and how that hall even survived is beyond me. But what wonderful memories. But Troy, the greatest asset, as you well know, about this home is not in the picture. It was that red brick building, the hotel building, right? Because, man, you didn't even have to have friends to play baseball. You could pitch against that wall and the ball came right back to you. I even honed the skill of dropping the ball out of my glove, hitting it with the bat, and then fielding it. So, there's all, and then about twice a year they would clean the building, and they'd get up on the roofs there, and they would throw all of my balls and Troy's balls that were up on top of the roof back out into the yard. And if they were in there, they would come out and they would yell at us if we were throwing balls against the side of the building. But just like Dad, we found that it was okay. We could put up with a little chewing out here and there as long as we could continue when they weren't there to throw the ball against the building. And so all kind of memories of growing there. And I'm mindful of being here that my concept of home, well, it was based right here, in many regards grew beyond that physical house, because just diagonally across the, whoops, you can't see why I'm pointing at that, can you, Tom? You have no idea why I'm pointing at. But if, you come diagonally across where Connie lives now, that was the hub. And I've explained to my kids, and it's nice being back in town and being with so much family. And I know Ella has been concerned moving the whole way to Brookville that she might not get to see us as much, Janice. But we would gather there, right? And then all I'd have to do is walk this way, and there were two houses, next two houses up were just these wonderful places of refuge, and just so many wonderful memories of home. And when we think of home, we tend to think of that idealized home, don't we? That perfect home. I ask you this morning, I need a little bit of help. When you think of the ideal home, what is one word that comes to your mind? You would give me a word that comes to mind when you think of home. Love, family. What was that, Anna? Relaxing. That's not the source. It doesn't surprise me I came up. It's not the source I would have expected. Love, family, relaxing. Anything else? Oh, I was gonna be beside myself if someone didn't say that, Mike. Security and safety. Anything else? Love, family, relaxation, which only happens with security and safety. Friendship, yeah. These ideas and beautiful pictures of home. And you know what? Back in this picture, that's a good one too. God's perfect. Back at this picture, all those things were here. But there was also some other things, right? Maybe some minor inconveniences at first. I remember when Stephanie first moved in, the first night I remember, it was really change in lifestyle for both Stephanie and I. But the first night I remember, she's in the hallway and outside my door, and she's crying because she wants in Mom and Dad's room. And she cries and she cries and she cries, and I made a horrible mistake. I just wanted to go to sleep. And at the time, I've got to tell you guys, I thought you were horrible parents for this. And then I learned the value of letting your children cry themselves to sleep, and there's real value in that, let me tell you. But I made a horrible mistake, and I said, Stephanie, you can come in here. And then I lost my personal space to Stephanie being in my room until Chris was born, in which case things got worse. And I never got it back until eventually in college I walked diagonally across the field and into my grandparents' basement just to get a little bit of space. There was some inconvenience there, but then there were some more serious downsides. There was some anger at times. There was fighting. There was contention. There were mistakes made from everyone in that household. And you see, when we think about our homes, wow, it's one thing to think about that idealized, beautiful, and perfect home where everything is as we would want it to be. We realize that because I'm complicated, our homes are complicated. And they have those beautiful concepts of friendship, love, relaxation, family, and security, but they also have some other things that go along with them. Does anyone recognize this quote or those initials? This is from a published writer, but she said, not talking about the home. She wasn't talking about the home, but she said, I wrote down, she said, when did I say that? I said, I don't remember, but I wrote it down. I like the ideal, but the reality isn't very pretty. Like I said, she wasn't referring to home when she said that. But it applies, doesn't it? It applies. Because it's complicated. It's complicated. This concept of home, though, is something that I will say we all yearn for, we all desire, we all seek after. And I showed just a little bit of hesitation because we're so different, we are so complicated that sometimes people would say, no, that's not me. But I've never, I don't think, met anyone that did not have a desire to have a home, a place where security and love and all these beautiful places reigned and were supreme. And this concept of love goes back with us clear to the very beginning. And without thinking about, we can read through Scripture and we can miss this, but I dare say to you, once it's pointed out, if you have missed it, you will not be able to unsee this, because a concept of home is a fundamental building block of the story that God has presented to us. Both God's story and my story. You see, in the beginning, God created a home. A beautiful home. And I think we can only appreciate how wonderful this home was when we understand how quickly we lost it. in the reality that we live in today. And to some sense, aren't we all seeking, yearning for, and pursuing Eden? Now there's this shocking statement at the end of God creating a home that, makes us gasp and is kind of befuddling. You're reading through the story, and at least I am, through Genesis, the first 2 chapters, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, God made light, and it was good. Oh, okay. And then he made the heavenly host, and it was good. And, everything except man was good, Ernie. After he made man, he said it was not good, that he should live alone. And so he had to, go ahead and further his work there. So it was, at the end of chapter 1, very good. And all this story kind of makes sense. And you see God make it. And then we get to the end of chapter 2, right before we lose it. And there's this ever so important statement. I think so easy to miss. And the man and his wife were both naked and not ashamed. Like, what? Why that tidbit of information, God? Really? You had to put that image in our mind? They were not ashamed. I mentioned in the Bible study about mistreating Amanda, and one of the many, many ways I mistreat Amanda is every once in a while she'll be in the kitchen getting coffee or something in her nightgown, and or some variation of that. And we have people show up at our house at all hours of the day. I don't always communicate to Amanda so-and-so is coming over, but one of my favorite stunts to pull is, hey Amanda, Mike's at the door. And she goes scrambling to her security of her room, right? And the thing is that sometimes someone is at the door, and so she doesn't dare ever call me on it. I thoroughly get so much enjoyment out of that. And I share it for you this morning because I think it gets to this concept of what God's telling us. He created this home where they are so safe, where they are so secure, where they are so relaxed. Man, they never have to put clothes on. It's just safe. There's a lot in that statement, isn't there? It's perfect. And yet, in the very next sentence, we mess that up. And it gets to a point where, forget being secure enough to be naked. I can't hardly be myself, right? I can't be unguarded when I'm around my fellow mankind. I have to be protected and watch out for safety. This concept of home is not only within each of us, it is a central theme of the Bible. And we're going to look at just a couple of examples, but notice what an important part of God's story the home is. In fact, Genesis, the 12th chapter and verse 1, is this point in our story where we take this very important turn, where God says, I'm going to take a huge step in remedying how you messed home up. And what he does is he comes to Abraham and he says, Abram at that time, you are going to have to leave your home. That's the important part of the story. Do you think Abram had a lot of good things about home? Absolutely. Do you think Abram's home was perfect? I don't know anything else about Abram other than he was a man, his family were men, or people, I mean to say. So his home life was far from perfect. And God says, you're going to have to leave the way you're doing things and where you are and go somewhere else. And that blessing or that promise is given to Abraham. But notice in verse 7, when he gets down to what we would call the promised land, and then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. God's saying, I'm going to give you a home. All throughout the Psalms and all throughout the prophetic literature of the Old Testament, we see that God is calling them, the Israelite people, to be what they're to be so that they could have safety and security and love in their homeland that He was giving them. You know who I know for certain did not have a great home life? Was David. We aren't told a lot about David's early life, but what we are told, there's not much positive there. He certainly didn't have his father's approval. He certainly didn't have his father's confidence. He certainly didn't have a great relationship with his siblings. And he certainly didn't make a perfect home for his family. But do you know what David was yearning for, seeking after, absolutely obsessed with? Was the concept of home. You see, sometimes we become so familiar with these passages and we put them in certain contexts that we can miss some of the richness. At the end of that 23rd Psalm, David says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David was obsessed with that house. He wanted to build God a house, and God says, no, through Nathan, you can't. And so David says, you mean I can't construct it? And God says, no. And he says, well, I'll do everything I can to prepare for it. And so he gets all the preparations. He gets all the materials. And he has them there in a big pile, as though it were, along with all the instructions on how to build it. And he says to Solomon, Solomon, I can't do it, but you can. Here's how you do it. He was obsessed with living in the house of God, which most literally at this point would have been the tabernacle, to be the temple. Notice how this story comes right on through, and we could look at so many of the New Testament passages. But speaking of those heroic people of faith of the 11th chapter of Hebrews, and more generally, because specifically we're talking about those heroes that are mentioned by name in the 11th chapter, but more generally, we're talking about all these faithful men of God, including David, that were coming through the story. And the Hebrew writer says, these all died in faith, having not received the things promised. What were they looking for? What had they been promised that they didn't receive? It was a home. It was that idealized home that they sought for. He continues on, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on earth. You see, they lacked that home. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had an opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country. That is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a home, a city, the Hebrew writer wrote. They were they were following God's instruction to find a home. That it was promised to Abraham, this will be the land. And so they got there, and prior, the Hebrew writers made the point that there still remains a rest at the time of David. It wasn't the home that they had intended. Why? Because Tom, you and I were there. They were there. People were there. And they were incapable of following through on what God had commanded them to do. And so it wasn't what they were looking for. But notice he says that God has prepared for them a city. If the concept of heaven comes into your mind when you read that, raise your hand if you would. It's certainly there. But you know, the Hebrew writer's talking about something else other than just heaven. Would you like to venture a guess on what else the Hebrew writer's talking about with the city that's been prepared? It's the church. The very next chapter, in fact, chapter 1 starts out being, therefore, since we're encompassed with such a great cloud of witnesses, let us do what? Focus ourselves on the author and finisher of our faith, Jesus Christ. Before the end of that chapter, after he says, don't leave it to go back to your physical home, don't go back to your physical nation, he says, we have a kingdom that cannot be shaken. He told them the physical home's going to be shaken. And it was. And you know what? It is. But you have a kingdom that cannot be shaken. You see, Jesus had promised a home. Promised a home. He's getting ready to be crucified here. And he says, let not your hearts be troubled. It amazes me that Jesus is saying this to his disciples right before he's crucified. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I told you that I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and I will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Jesus says, listen, I'm going to leave, but don't worry. I'm going to make you a home. And that home is a place you will be also. Of course, we know the conversation that follows that. Lord, how would we get there? We don't know the way. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. Is Jesus talking about heaven? Yes. But as we're going to see in just a turn of the page or a flip of a slide, he was also talking about the idealized human church. You see, Kevin read for us this passage, and we could go so many descriptions of the church. But Paul is writing about the church throughout the entire book of Ephesians. And he says, for though through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father. Through who? Jesus. Kind of makes us reminiscent of this passage, doesn't it? Through Jesus, we have access through one Spirit to the Father, so that when you are no longer strangers and aliens, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. Talking about home. Talking about home. Built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place by the Spirit. I believe it is God's desire. I believe that I know that it is my aim. I believe that it is yours. And I know that it is a goal that we all should be striving for. To create, to be the idealized home, a place where your heart can find a home. You see, the church should be a place of safety, not judgment, of encouragement, not discouragement, of help, not obstacles, of love, not hate, of unity, not division. You can think of all the things that were inconvenient, complicated, and undesirable about your physical home. In the church is going to have all of the same problems, but should be the exact opposite. It's our goal. It's our aim. It's our desire. To provide for you, to provide for me, to provide for the people of our community a home. To allow our children to flourish, to have a place, and to be loved, secure, relax, friendship. Have all these things in the church. I'm going to end with reading this. I was finalizing my lesson last night and someone sent this to me, and I think it really summarizes, and it's focused more towards our youth. But I think it summarizes everything we've talked about here today, about our goal and what we're aiming to be. A home that demonstrates the love of our Father, the example of our Father. It's entitled, I Don't Want to Raise Church Kids. That's right. I don't want to raise church kids. Matter of fact, it's one of my biggest fears. That they would go to church every week of their lives and never experience what the whole purpose of the church is really about. That they would come and learn about God but never actually seek and find Him for themselves. That they would come and learn the stories of the Bible but never realize that they too are a Bible story waiting to happen. That their life is woven into the tapestry of life that God has created, and that they are here for a greater purpose. That they would think that God is kept inside four walls. That they would sing the songs but never have more than a shallow appreciation for the words they sing. that those words written by sinners turned saints by the blood of Jesus would never penetrate their heart. That they would sing of the light but never know the light. That they would hear about grace but never know how desperately they need it. That they would learn about mercy but never know the one who bestows it. That they would think worship is something that just happens on Sunday mornings and not every minute of their life. That they would just up and walk away from the church one day and never return. No, no, no. I want to raise Jesus kids. That they would come to church because they know Jesus. That they would see themselves as part of the church, the body of Christ. That they would work together with their fellow believers to be the hands and feet of Jesus to the community that they serve. That they would see themselves in the story that was written at the beginning of time. That they would look to Jesus when they make mistakes and not be overcome with gratitude at the grace that they are given. That they would wake up in the morning thankful for the day and lay their head down every night assured of their eternal home. They would face the storms of life tethered to the one who came to save them. That they would know that they never walk alone and their lives are being held in the hands of God. That they would reach for the stars because they know the one who created them and that he has a purpose for their lives. That if they seek him first, that purpose will be fulfilled. That they will look up when they fall down, reach out when they need help, trusting that he is always reaching back to us. That they will be like oaks planted by the stream of living water and bear much fruit. That they would look at the neighbors and see the image bearers of God and love them fiercely. That they would look out at this world and see hope where everyone else sees hopelessness. That they would share that hope and bring his light into every dark corner they encounter. Yes, yes, yes. I want to raise Jesus kids. And if you found yourself kind of zoning out as I read that and thinking, I raised my kids, it is what it is. May I remind you that you are the children of God. Are you the Jesus kids that you were intended to be? Are we the home that we should be? And allow me to say, those mistakes, those shortcomings, we're human. So they're meant to be with us. But we strive to be as much the dwelling place of God as we possibly can. If you need help in that very endeavor, and we can help you by encouraging, praying with you, or helping you to take the next step of faith wherever you are, I encourage you to make that need known as together we stand and sing.